Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, as the world outside gradually grows quieter, I would like to invite you on a very special journey. Not a journey through deep forests or across vast oceans, but a journey through time itself. A voyage back to humanity's very first cities, where the earliest collective dreams were built from clay, stone, and faith. Perhaps we rarely pause to ask a question that seems remarkably simple. Where did the city begin? What inspired groups of people, once scattered across plains, riverbanks, and forests, to come together to build the first roads, the first temples, the first marketplaces, and eventually the first civilizations? Today, most of us live in cities. We move through crowded streets, beneath towering buildings, across plazas and shopping centers, rarely realizing that all of these things trace their origins back to a very ancient idea. The idea that human beings can live together on a large scale. Carl Gustav Jung once suggested that beneath each person's conscious mind lies a deeper layer that he called the collective unconscious, a realm that preserves the shared memories, symbols, and experiences of all humanity. And viewed through that lens, ancient cities were not merely architectural achievements that have long since disappeared. They were humanity's first dreams transformed into stone, brick, and streets. Tonight, together, we will explore 100 fascinating facts about some of the greatest ancient cities ever to exist. From Uruk, which many scholars regard as one of the world's earliest cities, to the legendary Babylon, the brilliant center of learning that was Alexandria, the mysterious Teotihuacan of the Americas, and countless other urban worlds, now buried beneath the dust of time. We will encounter forgotten kings, merchants who once connected entire continents, and ordinary people who walked streets that today survive only as ruins. We will discover how cities gave rise to power, religion, law, commerce, and even the collective memories that continue to shape our modern world. So, find a comfortable place to rest. Perhaps pull your blanket a little closer. Take a slow, gentle breath in, and allow the sounds of history to gradually carry you away from the concerns of today. If you enjoy these relaxing journeys through history, psychology, and the mysteries of human civilization, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every subscription helps us continue creating gentle stories to accompany you through peaceful evenings. But for now, let us travel back more than 5,000 years, back to the moment when the first cities began to appear, and when the story of humanity entered an entirely new chapter, the birth of the first city. If tonight you could travel back through time, not 100 years, not 1,000 years, but 5,000 years, 6,000 years, or perhaps even farther, you would not see paved roads, you would not see towering skyscrapers, you would not see electric lights stretching toward the horizon. Instead, you would find vast fields, marshlands beside winding rivers, herds of livestock moving slowly beneath the sun, small groups of people living in scattered villages. For most of its history, humanity lived this way. For hundreds of thousands of years, small communities, tribes, families, bands of hunter-gatherers. People knew one another. They saw the same faces every day. No one lived among tens of thousands of strangers. No one walked through crowded streets. No one depended upon vast bureaucratic systems. The world was much smaller then. But gradually, something remarkable began to happen. Little by little, slowly, like water wearing away stone, people began to gather together. At first, a few dozen, then a few hundred, then a few thousand, and eventually, tens of thousands. It may have been one of the most profound revolutions in human history. Not the invention of the wheel, not the discovery of metalworking, not even the invention of writing, but the moment human beings decided to live together on a scale never seen before. Carl Gustav Jung believed that within every human being exists a deep need to connect with something greater than oneself. A family, a tribe, a community, a people, a civilization. Because at the deepest level of the soul, we are not born to exist alone. We are born to belong. Perhaps the first city emerged from that ancient longing, the desire to belong to something larger than oneself. Imagine a farmer living more than 5,000 years ago. Each morning, he wakes beside a river. He sees his neighbors working in the fields. He hears children laughing and playing. He smells the scent of freshly baked bread. Over time, more people arrive. More homes appear. More granaries are built. More roads take shape. More marketplaces emerge. The village begins to grow. Then it grows larger still, until one day, no one calls it a village anymore. It has become a city, something entirely new in human history. Today, we take cities for granted, but from the perspective of history, a city is almost a miracle, a magnificent social invention, a structure so complex that tens of thousands of strangers can coexist without destroying one another. It sounds simple, but in truth, it is extraordinary. Because, as the number of people grows, everything begins to change. The old rules are no longer enough. In a small village, everyone knows everyone else. If disputes arise, the elders can settle them. If someone needs help, the entire community knows. But in a city of thousands of residents, that is no longer possible. And it was precisely at that moment that humanity's first social innovations began to emerge. Government, law, taxation, organized labor, protective forces, things we now consider completely ordinary. Yet there was once a time when none of them existed. Every early city was like a vast experiment, a place where humanity tested new ways of living together. Some succeeded, some failed, but all of them left their mark. Among these pioneering places, one name appears again and again in history books. Uruk, an ancient city in southern Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq. Many scholars regard Uruk as one of the world's first cities. Around 3,500 BCE, it had already become a massive population center by the standards of its age. While most of humanity still lived in small communities, Uruk was home to tens of thousands of inhabitants, an astonishing scale for its time. Imagine the feeling of someone entering Uruk for the very first time. From a distance, he sees enormous walls, mud brick structures rising above the plains, towering temples, crowded streets, bustling marketplaces, caravans of donkeys carrying goods, voices echoing from every direction. Perhaps the experience was not so different from that of a 19th century farmer arriving in New York or London for the first time. It was the feeling of standing before something far greater than the familiar world one had always known. Uruk was not merely a place to live, it was an idea. The idea that tens of thousands of people could cooperate. The idea that a complex society could be organized. The idea that human beings could construct a shared reality. It was in cities like these that writing first began to emerge. At first, not to compose poetry, not to tell stories, but to manage, to record, to count grain, to track goods, to oversee economic activity. That may sound rather mundane, yet it was profoundly important, because for the first time in history, memory no longer existed solely inside the human mind. It could be recorded, stored, preserved, carried across generations. Carl Jung spent many years studying collective memory. He believed that humanity is connected not only by blood or language, but also by shared symbols, shared stories, and shared experiences. And in a sense, writing became the first tool that allowed those memories to survive beyond a single lifetime. Through writing, a city could remember. A king dies, but the records remain. A harvest ends, but the numbers remain. A generation disappears, but the story remains. That was the moment history truly began. Not because human beings had only then appeared, But because human beings had finally learned how to speak to the future, cities also gave rise to something else entirely new: trade. Of course, the exchange of goods had existed long before, but within cities, trade became a system. Some people no longer farmed, no longer hunted. They became potters, metalworkers, builders, merchants, musicians, priests. Each person fulfilled a specialized role. A vast network of mutual dependence began to take shape, and it transformed human society forever. For the first time, a person could devote an entire life to a single profession. For the first time, knowledge could accumulate across generations. For the first time, specialization emerged on a large scale. One could argue that much of the modern world began in that moment, the moment the city was born. Yet cities did not merely create commerce. They also created something even more powerful. Meaning, because when tens of thousands of people live together, they need shared stories, shared symbols, shared beliefs. And that is when great temples began rising at the heart of cities, not merely as places of worship, but as the spiritual heart of the community. In the next section, we will journey deeper into the world of the first cities. We will explore how religion, power, and collective dreams transformed ancient urban centers into the great engines of human civilization. And from Uruk, that journey will lead us to Babylon, Alexandria, Rome, and many other legendary cities, places that helped shape the world we inhabit today. Part 1. The birth of the first city. 1. If marketplaces were the economic heart of a city, and if roads were its veins, then ancient temples were its soul. For from the earliest days of urban history, people did not gather together merely to exchange goods. They also gathered to share belief, to seek meaning, to answer together the same questions we continue to ask even today. Where do we come from? What governs the world? What happens after death? Why do harvests come and go? Why is the river gentle one year and destructive the next? In the first cities, these questions belonged to everyone. They became part of collective life itself. And for that reason, the largest structures were often not homes. They were temples. In Uruk, one of the most remarkable structures was the temple complex dedicated to the goddess Inanna. It was not merely a place for religious rituals. It was also a center of power, a center of economic activity, a center of culture. In the ancient world, the boundary between the divine and government was often remarkably thin. Rulers did not merely administer cities, they represented a sacred order. Carl Jung believed that religious symbols are among the oldest languages of the human soul. They appear in different civilizations, in different eras, yet often carry astonishingly similar images: the mother, the hero, the king, the sky, the Sunday, the serpent, the mountain, the temple. All of these are symbols he described as archetypes. And it is fascinating to realize that a city itself can also be viewed as an archetype, a collective image that humanity has recreated again and again for thousands of years. Because ultimately, a city is not merely a place where people live, it is a physical expression of how we imagine order itself. Every planned street, every constructed square, every wall that rises, reflects the way human beings wish to organize their world. If you stood upon a hill overlooking Uruk 5,000 years ago, you might have sensed this clearly. The houses, the markets, the temples, the city walls, all arranged according to a certain logic, a certain order, no longer the chaos of nature, no longer the untamed wilderness, but a world shaped by human hands. Perhaps that is what made the city such a profound turning point. For the first time in history, human beings were not merely adapting to their environment, they were reshaping it. They dug canals, built walls, laid roads, raised temples, creating spaces that had never existed in nature. And from this, another remarkable phenomenon emerged: collective memory. No longer the memory of a single family, no longer the memory of a single tribe, but the memory of an entire community. The city began to remember. It remembered its first kings, its great floods, its abundant harvests, its wars, its rituals, its founding myths. Each generation passed these memories on to the next, much as we still tell stories about Rome today, about Babylon, about Alexandria, about Pompeii. Those cities have been gone for a very long time, yet their memories remain alive. Perhaps because a city does not exist only in stone. It also exists in story. Think of Babylon. Historically, it was a great city of Mesopotamia, yet within humanity's imagination, Babylon became something larger, a symbol, a legend, a city appearing in sacred texts, myths, and stories spanning thousands of years. Or Alexandria, a city that once housed the most famous library of the ancient world. Even today, the very mention of Alexandria evokes thoughts of knowledge, of books, of human curiosity. That is remarkable. A city can disappear, yet its meaning can endure. Jung once wrote, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." Perhaps that is the secret of the ancient cities. It was not their size that made them immortal, not their walls, not their palaces, but the meaning they left behind. Pompeii offers another example. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE, the city was almost frozen in time. The tragedy destroyed thousands of lives, yet it also accidentally preserved a moment of history. Today, when archaeologists walk the streets of Pompeii, they do not merely see stone, they see life. Food stalls, wall paintings, carelessly scribbled messages, footprints left behind, the smallest details, the details kings rarely recorded, yet the details that tell us the most about being human. And on the other side of the ocean, thousands of miles from Europe, cities such as Teotihuacan were also flourishing. They had no contact with Rome, no knowledge of Babylon, no knowledge of Alexandria, yet they still built enormous avenues, towering pyramids, vast ceremonial centers. This has always amazed me. In completely different parts of the earth, human beings repeatedly arrived at the same idea, that they needed common centers, places to gather, to trade, to worship, to tell stories, to preserve memory. Cities appeared as though they were a natural stage in the growth of civilization. Perhaps Jung would say this is because the city is not merely an invention, it is an expression of the collective unconscious, an image humanity continually recreates whenever it reaches a certain stage of development. Yet whether Uruk, Babylon, Alexandria, Rome, or Teotihuacan, all shared one fundamental truth. They were built by ordinary people, bread sellers, boatmen, record keepers, builders, farmers, children running through the streets. History often remembers kings, but it is these unnamed people who were the true soul of the city, and perhaps that is the most beautiful legacy ancient cities leave behind. That civilization is not the achievement of a single individual, but the result of countless ordinary lives working together, one brick at a time, one road at a time, one inscription, one story, one dream, slowly accumulating across generations until they became humanity's first cities. And in the next section, we will continue that journey, leaving behind Uruk and the earliest urban worlds, to explore the ancient capitals that transformed history itself, places where the first administrations, the first social classes, and the first centers of power began shaping the destiny of human civilization, the capitals that changed the world. When we look back at the first cities, such as Uruk, we can sense something truly remarkable. Not merely the appearance of walls, not merely marketplaces, not merely temples, but the birth of an entirely new idea. The idea that human beings could organize themselves into a community larger than anything they had ever known before. Yet history never stands still. Once the idea of the city was born, it began to grow. Like a seed, discovering fertile soil, villages became towns, towns became cities, and some cities eventually became capitals, centers of power where the destinies of tens of thousands and sometimes millions of people were decided. Tonight, imagine that we are standing upon a high hill. Before us stretches a vast plain. The sun is setting. Its final rays reflect from rooftops made of clay. In the distance, enormous walls surround a city. Within those walls are palaces, temples, granaries, early administrative offices, busy streets filled with people. And somewhere within that maze, decisions are being made that will change the course of history. That is what made ancient capitals so extraordinary. They were not merely places where people lived, they were places where power gathered, where memory was preserved, where new ideas were born, and sometimes, where the collective dreams of an entire civilization took shape. Carl Jung believed that every community creates symbols to represent itself. A flag, an emblem, a god, a king, or a city. In that sense, ancient capitals were not merely administrative centers. They were physical expressions of collective identity. They told people, this is who we are. This is where we belong. This is the world we have built together. One of the earliest places to embody this idea may have been Jericho. Today, Jericho is often described as one of the oldest human settlements ever constructed. Situated near the Jordan Valley, it was inhabited thousands of years before the Egyptian pyramids appeared. Whenever I think about Jericho, I feel something deeply moving, because it reminds us that civilization did not begin with vast empires. It began with small communities, groups of people who decided to remain in one place long enough to call it home. Perhaps on quiet nights 10,000 years ago, the first inhabitants of Jericho sat around fires just as their ancestors had done. But there was one important difference. They were no longer thinking only about tomorrow. They had begun thinking about next year, about the next generation, about creating something that would endure. That was the moment history changed. For when human beings began thinking beyond the limits of their own lifetimes, civilization began to emerge. And after Jericho, we arrive at a place even more intriguing. Çatalhöyük, an ancient settlement located in what is now modern-day Turkey. Viewed from above, Çatalhöyük hardly resembles any modern city. There were no grand roads, no central plazas, no wide boulevards. Its houses were built so closely together that people often traveled across rooftops. They moved from one roof to another, as though walking along streets suspended in the air. It sounds unfamiliar, yet wonderfully fascinating, because it reveals that, in the early days of urban life, humanity experimented with many different ways of living together. No one knew exactly what the ideal model would be. There was no blueprint. Everything was experimentation. Everything was discovery. Jung once suggested that human development always involves exploring new possibilities. Perhaps the first cities were the same. They were enormous collective experiments, attempts to answer a single question: how can thousands of people live together? As time continued to pass, cities grew larger, populations expanded, social structures became more complex. And with that complexity came something new: social classes. In small communities, differences in status were often limited. But in growing cities, society began to stratify. Some people owned land, some managed trade, some conducted religious ceremonies, some governed, some labored. Gradually, distinct roles emerged. This created not only power, but identity. People began defining themselves through their place in society. One person was an artisan, another a merchant, another a priest, another a scribe. And in that moment, the city became more than a place to live. It became a social ecosystem, a complex network of relationships. What is fascinating is that many of the things we consider ordinary today trace their origins back to this period. Taxes, administration, population records, law, food distribution systems, storage facilities, institutions of authority. all gradually emerged within the first ancient capitals. We often imagine that civilization was created by kings, but in reality, civilization was created by the challenge of managing large numbers of people. Once a community became large enough, new structures had to emerge, and through those structures, the world began to change. Yet alongside power, something else became increasingly important: belief. Because no society survives through laws alone. No city is held together solely by taxation. Human beings need stories, symbols, shared values, things that allow thousands of strangers to feel that they belong to the same community. That is why temples, rituals, and myths became essential parts of ancient capitals. In the next section, we will continue our journey to cities such as Ur, Memphis, Thebes, Nineveh, and Amarna, places where power, religion, and human imagination combined to create some of the most magnificent capitals of the ancient world. And it was there that the first foundations of states, empires, and collective identities began to take shape. If in the previous chapter we witnessed the first seeds of civilization being planted in settlements like Jericho and Çatalhöyük, then now, as the night of history continues to unfold before us, we will watch those seeds grow into powerful capitals, places where authority was no longer merely the influence of a village elder, places where memory was no longer passed solely through stories shared around a fire, places where tens of thousands of people began living under the same systems of law, belief, and symbolism. One such city was Ur. Situated within the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, Ur became one of the greatest centers of Sumerian civilization. At night, standing upon the roof of a mud brick house and gazing into the star-filled desert sky, the people of Ur could see the enormous ziggurat rising above the city. The structure resembled an artificial mountain ascending from the plain. It was not merely a temple, not merely architecture. It was a declaration. A statement that humanity was attempting to connect heaven and earth. Carl Jung believed that since ancient times, human beings have carried within themselves a longing for the sacred, not because they were weak, but because they recognized how small they were before the vastness of the universe. And perhaps monuments such as the ziggurat were physical expressions of that longing. They were bridges between the visible and the invisible, between humanity and that which transcends humanity. The trading cities that controlled the world. After journeying through the capitals of ancient empires, where power was carved into massive city walls, magnificent palaces, and mighty armies, it is easy to believe that history has always belonged to those who possessed the greatest number of soldiers, that the world was built with swords, protected by shields, expanded through war. Yet as the night of history gently settles over the ancient seas, another story begins to emerge, a quieter story, a less bloody story, yet one that was sometimes even more powerful than armies themselves. It is the story of trade. For very early on, humanity discovered a simple truth. If war is the fastest way to take what you want, exchange is the most enduring way to obtain what you need. And from that realization, an entirely new kind of city was born. Cities that did not dominate through armies, did not rule through fear, but through ships, marketplaces, coins, trade routes, stories, ideas, and encounters between civilizations. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Perhaps something similar is true of civilizations. For when peoples met through trade, they exchanged far more than goods. They exchanged ways of seeing the world. They exchanged beliefs. They exchanged knowledge. And sometimes those encounters changed history more profoundly than any war ever could. Imagine that we are standing along the shores of the Mediterranean more than 2,000 years ago. The sea lies dark beneath the moonlight. Wooden ships drift quietly in the night breeze. In the distance, oil lamps flicker along the harbor. There is no sound of cannon fire, no thunder of marching armies, only the rhythm of the waves. the creaking of ropes against wooden hulls, and people from distant worlds meeting one another. It was in places like these that the power of trade was born. One of the earliest masters of that art was Tyre. Today, Tyre lies within modern Lebanon, but in the ancient world, it was one of the wealthiest cities in the Mediterranean. What made Tyre remarkable was that it possessed neither vast, fertile fields nor a sprawling empire. It did not command enormous armies like Assyria or Persia. Its strength came from the sea. The Phoenicians of Tyre were exceptional sailors, bold merchants, people willing to sail beyond unfamiliar horizons in search of opportunity. They traveled to Cyprus, Egypt, Greece, Sicily, Spain, North Africa, and wherever they went, they left their mark. Not through fortresses, but through ports. Not through temples, but through networks of trade. There is something surprisingly modern about that story. For the wealthiest cities in today's world often are not those with the largest armies. They are the ones most connected to other people. Tyre understood that truth thousands of years ago. One famous product helped make the city legendary: Tyrian purple dye, a precious purple color extracted from tiny sea snails. To create even a small amount of dye required thousands of shells. The process was extraordinarily labor-intensive, and because of that, the color became a symbol of wealth and power. Kings, queens, nobles, all desired to possess it. It is remarkable to think that a tiny creature living on the ocean floor could help create the power of an entire city. Yet history is often shaped by such things. Small details, unexpected inventions, opportunities that others overlooked. Near Tyre stood Sidon, another great Phoenician city. If Tyre symbolized maritime ambition, Sidon became famous for craftsmanship and glass production. Objects created there traveled throughout the Mediterranean, crossing political borders, crossing language barriers, connecting civilizations. And then there was Byblos, a city whose very name carries a fascinating story. It was from the name of this city that the Greeks developed the word biblion, meaning book, and eventually the word Bible. For centuries, Byblos served as a major center for exporting papyrus from Egypt. Through its harbors, knowledge traveled, texts were copied, stories were preserved. If Babylon symbolized the power of the state, Byblos symbolized the power of memory. For ultimately, a civilization survives not because of its walls, but because of what it can pass on. Jung believed that collective memory forms the foundation of human identity. Perhaps trading cities functioned in a similar way. They did not merely transport goods, they transported memory, ideas, stories. A ship leaving Tyre might carry olive oil, but it also carried myths, languages, music, new ways of understanding the world. And when it arrived in a distant land, all those things began to blend together. From that blending emerged something extraordinary. Not a new civilization, but a connection between civilizations. Perhaps that was the greatest power of trading cities. They did not build walls that separated people. They built invisible bridges. Bridges connecting peoples, faiths, languages, and different worlds. And in the next chapter, we will continue our journey through some of the greatest crossroads of the ancient world. To Petra amid the Red Desert, to Palmyra, where caravans met, to Jerusalem, Antioch, and Damascus, cities where trade carried not only goods, but also religions, empires, and dreams that would reshape human history. The glorious capitals of Persia and Central Asia, while the ships of Tyre, Sidon, and Carthage sailed across the deep blue waters of the Mediterranean, carrying goods, knowledge, and stories from one land to another. History seemed to be written upon the sea itself. Yet east of those harbors, beyond deserts, mountains, and endless plains, another kind of power was taking shape. Not the power of merchants, not the power of fleets, but the power of conquered distance. For in human history, there is a challenge greater than building a city. That challenge is governing an empire. A city may govern tens of thousands. An empire may govern millions. Many languages, many peoples, many beliefs, many lands separated by thousands of miles. And as the night of history gently unfolds before us, perhaps no place demonstrates that challenge more clearly than the ancient Persian Empire. If Rome would later become a symbol of Western power, Persia was one of humanity's earliest attempts to unite a vast world into a single entity. Carl Jung once wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct." Although he was speaking about creativity of the mind, the quote invites us to reflect upon ancient civilizations. For creating an empire stretching from Egypt to Central Asia was not merely an act of military strength, it was an act of imagination, a collective dream, a belief that distant lands could be connected, and the cities of Persia became the physical embodiment of that dream. Let us begin with Susa. Today, only quiet ruins remain beneath the skies of Iran. Yet more than 2,000 years ago, Susa was one of the most important administrative centers in the world. If you entered the city during the height of the Achaemenid Empire, the first thing you might notice would not be its size, but its sense of order, messengers constantly arriving and departing, officials recording documents, merchants arriving from distant lands, archives filled with administrative records, everything functioning like gears within a vast machine. Today, when we send an email in seconds or follow news from the other side of the world in real time, it is easy to forget that there was once an age when information traveled by horse, by foot, by caravans crossing deserts, and cities like Susa made the seemingly impossible possible. They allowed a vast empire to remain connected. In one sense, Susa was like a brain, a place where information was received, processed, and transmitted. Yet what made the Persian Empire truly remarkable was not only its cities, it was also the roads that connected them. One of the most astonishing achievements of the ancient world was the Royal Road, stretching more than 2,000 kilometers, connecting Susa to Sardis in the west. Herodotus famously described the Persian courier system with these words, "Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds." Those words would later inspire modern postal systems. But behind them lies a deeper idea. Power does not come merely from conquering territory. It comes from connecting territory. An empire does not truly exist if its lands cannot communicate with one another. And perhaps this is one of Persia's greatest lessons. Connection creates strength, not only in politics, not only in economics, but in human life itself. Jung believed that people mature through the integration of different parts of the soul. Perhaps civilizations do the same. They mature when they learn how to connect differences. Persian cities did not attempt to make every people identical. Instead, they created a structure within which many peoples could coexist. It was an extraordinarily modern idea, and perhaps one reason why the empire endured longer than many of its rivals. But if Susa was the administrative brain, Persepolis was the stage of power. Even today, when only columns and foundations remain, Persepolis still inspires awe. Imagine a spring morning more than 2,000 years ago, delegations from across the empire entering the city, people from Egypt, from Babylon, from Lydia, from Bactria, each group carrying gifts, their own clothing, their own language, their own symbols, all moving toward the center of the empire, all ascending the grand stairways leading to the palace. This was not merely a ceremony, it was a message, a political drama staged in stone. Every column, every relief, every courtyard was designed to tell visitors, this is the heart of the world. This is where all roads converge. This is where power takes physical form. Archaeologists today remain astonished by the sophistication of the reliefs at Persepolis. Not scenes of war, not scenes of slaughter, but processions of people from many lands standing together within an orderly world. It was a unique form of propaganda, not the power of fear, but the power of unity. And perhaps that is why Persepolis continues to move us even today. For deep within the collective unconscious that Jung described, humanity carries an ancient longing, a longing for connection, a longing to belong to something greater than oneself, a longing to transform diversity into a meaningful whole. In the next chapter, we will continue our journey to Pasargadae, Bactra, and Samarkand, cities that stood upon the routes connecting east and west, places where deserts, mountains, commerce, and culture met, and where the ancient roads quietly prepared the way for one of the greatest networks of connection in human history, the Silk Road, the centers of ancient Indian civilization. As the caravans depart from Persepolis and the roads of the Persian Empire gradually disappear into the night, our journey continues eastward, beyond the Iranian plateau, beyond the endless deserts, beyond the lands where kings built empires through laws, roads, and ceremonies. On that distant horizon lies another world, a world where power was measured not only by territory, not only by armies, but also by knowledge, by contemplation, by questions about the nature of existence itself. We are entering the ancient Indian subcontinent, one of the deepest cradles of human thought. If Babylon invited people to think about power, and if Persepolis inspired reflection on empire, then ancient India encouraged humanity to think about itself, about the mind, about the soul, about humanity's place within the universe. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." For many centuries, the great cities of India seemed to live according to that spirit. They were not merely places of trade, not merely centers of government. They were places where people learned how to look inward, where knowledge, spirituality, and power met. One of the first cities we encounter on this journey is Taxila. Today, most of what remains are quiet ruins resting beneath the sun. Yet more than 2,000 years ago, Taxila was one of the most celebrated centers of learning in the world. When people think of ancient universities, they often remember Athens or Alexandria. Yet Taxila existed long before many other famous centers of knowledge reached their height. From across the subcontinent, scholars, students, and seekers of wisdom traveled there. They studied languages, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, mathematics, and sometimes they studied how to understand themselves. Imagine a peaceful morning in Taxila. The sun has just risen above ancient gardens. Groups of students sit beneath the shade of trees. Teachers offer their lessons. Gentle debates unfold. There is no sound of marching armies, no clash of weapons, only the voices of people trying to understand the world. This is another kind of power, a power that cannot be seen, cannot be held in one's hands, yet possesses the ability to outlive centuries. For empires eventually fall, walls eventually crumble, but ideas can continue to live. Jung devoted much of his life to studying the symbols that arise within the human mind. He observed that whether in the East or the West, the fundamental questions remain the same. Who are we? What gives life meaning? What connects us all? Perhaps that is why centers of learning, such as Taxila, continue to fascinate us today, because they represent something ancient within human nature, the longing to understand. Yet ancient India did not create only cities of scholarship, it also created capitals of power, and one of the most important among them was Pataliputra. If Taxila resembled a vast library of the ancient world, Pataliputra resembled the command center of an empire. It once served as the capital of the Mauryan Empire, one of the largest empires in Indian history. From here, decisions affecting millions of people were made. Officials administered vast territories. Messengers carried orders across great distances. Merchants transported goods along extensive trade routes. What is fascinating is that throughout history, knowledge and power often appear together. The most advanced societies are rarely defined by strong armies alone. They also possess systems of education, systems of administration, systems of record-keeping. Pataliputra was an example of exactly that. It was not merely a city, it was the brain of an entire civilization. But if Taxila represented knowledge, and if Pataliputra represented power, then Varanasi represented something even deeper, something that is perhaps difficult to express in words. For Varanasi is not merely a city, it is a symbol, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. For thousands of years, the Ganges River has flowed through its heart. The sun has continued to rise above the stone steps descending toward the water. Ceremonies have continued, prayers have continued, generations have come and gone, yet the city has remained. There is something profoundly moving about places like Varanasi, because in a world that is always changing, human beings continually search for something enduring. Jung described this as the need to connect with something greater than oneself, something many cultures call the sacred. Perhaps that is why millions of people have journeyed to Varanasi across the centuries, not to accumulate wealth, not to conquer, but to search for meaning, to confront life's deepest questions. And that is what makes this city one of the most extraordinary places in human history. As night continues to settle over the ancient rivers of India, our journey is far from complete. Ahead lies Ujjain, where astronomers observed the night sky. There is Anuradhapura and Sigiriya, centers of power and spirituality on the island of Sri Lanka. There is Polonnaruwa, where the dreams of kings were carved into stone. And in the next chapter, we will continue exploring how these cities wove together astronomy, belief, and power into one of the most fascinating chapters of ancient history, the mystery of the Indus Valley civilization. After leaving behind the sacred rivers of Varanasi, the ancient halls of Taxila, and the capitals where power, knowledge, and spirituality converged, our journey tonight takes us somewhere even stranger, a civilization that built astonishing cities, a civilization whose urban planning still amazes modern archaeologists, a civilization that possessed sophisticated drainage systems while much of the world was still struggling with early settlements. And strangely enough, it is also a civilization that left almost no voice of its own behind, for even today, we have not fully deciphered its writing. Tonight, let your mind drift slowly along the waters of the ancient Indus River, a river that nourished millions of people more than 4,000 years ago. Along its banks stood cities such as Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dholavira, and Lothal, names that echo like distant whispers from a forgotten dream of history. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it is comprehensible. Yet sometimes, history presents us with exceptions, places where the more we learn, the more we realize how little we truly know." The Indus Valley civilization is one of those exceptions. If Babylon left behind clay tablets, if Egypt left hieroglyphs carved into stone, if Greece left philosophy, and if Rome left law, the people of the Indus left something much quieter: small seals, mysterious symbols, perfectly planned cities, and countless unanswered questions. Perhaps it is precisely this silence that makes the civilization so captivating. For human beings have always been drawn toward the unknown. Jung believed that our collective unconscious contains archetypal images of discovery. The hero entering a dark forest, the explorer moving toward an unfamiliar horizon, the archaeologist digging into the earth in search of forgotten stories. The Indus civilization is such a forest of mysteries. Imagine a morning more than 4,000 years ago. In Mohenjo-Daro, the sun rises slowly above the plain. The straight streets begin to fill with life. Residents open their doors. Merchants prepare their goods. Children run through narrow lanes. Artisans begin their work in workshops. At first glance, the scene may not seem very different from many other ancient cities, but if you look more closely, something remarkable becomes apparent. The streets of Mohenjo-Daro were laid out in a grid pattern. Many residential districts were carefully planned. Buildings were constructed with extraordinary consistency. Most remarkable of all was the water system. While many ancient civilizations focused on building massive palaces or magnificent temples, the people of the Indus seemed to devote special attention to something profoundly practical: sanitation, clean water, drainage. Today, this may sound ordinary, but more than 4,000 years ago, it was astonishing. Many houses in Mohenjo-daro had private bathing areas, water channels, brick-built drainage systems, inspection covers that allowed maintenance. Even many medieval cities would later struggle to achieve a comparable level of planning. This has led researchers to ask a fascinating question: who were the people who conceived all of this? How did they organize their society? What inspired them to place such importance on the quality of communal life? The answer remains unclear, and perhaps it is precisely the absence of answers that makes the mystery so compelling. One of the strangest aspects of the Indus civilization is that we find very few of the familiar symbols of power. No gigantic pyramids, no colossal statues of kings, no vast royal tombs, no monuments openly proclaiming authority as in Babylon or Egypt. That does not mean they lacked leadership, but power seems to have been expressed differently, more subtly, less dramatically, or perhaps in a way entirely unfamiliar to us. Jung was deeply interested in how cultures express power through symbol. He observed that every society creates images reflecting what it values most. If that is true, then the absence of enormous palaces in the Indus world may be telling us a very different story. Perhaps this was a society where communal organization mattered more than the glorification of individuals. Perhaps it was a civilization in which power did not need to be constantly displayed. Of course, these are only possibilities, because the truth is that we still do not know, and perhaps that uncertainty is what makes the Indus civilization so remarkable. For throughout history, most civilizations tried to speak loudly enough for future generations to hear. The people of the Indus seem to have whispered, a whisper that has endured for 4,000 years, a whisper that we are still trying to hear. Yet the greatest mystery remains their writing. On thousands of recovered seals, archaeologists have found symbols repeated again and again, ordered, systematic, clearly not random drawings. They represent a form of language, a system for communicating information, a method of preserving memory. Yet to this day, we have not fully deciphered them. Pause for a moment and consider that. A civilization of millions, with carefully planned cities, with extensive trade networks, has left behind thousands of messages, and we cannot read them. It is like standing before a vast library where every book remains locked, like hearing a voice echo across time while being unable to understand its language. There is something both beautiful and heartbreaking about that image, because it reminds us that the past is not always ready to reveal all of its secrets, and perhaps that is what makes the exploration of history so endlessly fascinating. In the next chapter, we will journey deeper into Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Dholavira, and Lothal. We will explore ancient ports, enormous reservoirs, distant trade routes, and the many theories surrounding the mysterious disappearance of one of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world. A civilization that still sleeps beneath the dust of time, waiting for us to listen to the stories it has not yet been able to tell. The megacities of ancient America. As the cities of the Indus civilization gradually disappear into the mist of mysteries yet to be deciphered, our journey tonight crosses the ocean, beyond the deserts of Persia, beyond the sacred rivers of India, beyond the familiar lands of the Near East and the Mediterranean, toward another world, a world that, for many centuries, developed almost entirely separate from the rest of humanity. A world where pyramids rose from tropical forests, where enormous cities appeared among mountains and valleys, where the gods seemed present in every movement of the sun, the moon, and the stars. Tonight, we step into the megacities of ancient America, the cities of the Maya, the Aztecs, and the mysterious civilizations of Mesoamerica, there is something unique about these cities. Unlike Babylon, unlike Athens, unlike Rome, the cities of ancient America were not built merely to serve human beings. They were built to reflect the universe itself. Carl Jung once wrote, "The stars are the visible expression of the unconscious." Although he expressed this idea within the context of symbolism and astrology, it evokes a beautiful truth. From the earliest times, human beings have looked toward the heavens in search of meaning, not because they fully understood the stars, but because they sensed something sacred within the workings of the cosmos. And in ancient Mesoamerica, that feeling was transformed into stone, into streets, into plazas, into immense pyramids. If we had to choose one city that embodied this vision, Teotihuacan would likely be the first name that comes to mind. Even today, standing among its ruins evokes a feeling that is difficult to describe, a very particular kind of silence, as though one has entered a place that once contained something profoundly important. Teotihuacan was not a small city. At its height, it may have been one of the largest urban centers in the world. Tens of thousands, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of people once lived there. While many ancient cities evolved gradually over time, Teotihuacan appears to have been planned with an astonishingly comprehensive vision. Broad avenues, carefully organized residential districts, vast public plazas, and at its center stood structures that still leave modern visitors in awe. The Pyramid of the Sunday, the Pyramid of the Moon, the Avenue of the Dead. The names alone evoke a sense of mystery, yet the most fascinating aspect is not simply their size, it is the way the entire city was arranged. Research suggests that the principal axes of Teotihuacan were aligned with astronomical phenomena. This was no accident. For these civilizations, the sky was not merely scenery, it was a calendar, a mythology, a map of meaning. They observed the sunrise, tracked the movements of planets, recorded seasonal cycles, and from those observations, they created cities that mirrored the order of the cosmos. Perhaps this is one of the most beautiful ideas of the ancient world, that a city is not merely a place where people live, but a miniature image of the universe itself. Jung called such recurring images archetypes, symbols that appear again and again in the human mind across different cultures. One of the most powerful archetypes is that of the sacred center, a place that connects heaven and earth, a place where human beings feel themselves part of a greater order. Teotihuacan seems to have been built from precisely that longing. Yet Teotihuacan was not alone. Farther south, within the dense forests of the Maya world, other cities were flourishing. Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, Copan, Caracol, names that sound like echoes from a vanished world. Imagine a morning more than 1,000 years ago. The sun rises above the tropical canopy. Birdsong echoes through the mist. From the summit of a towering stone pyramid, priests observe the horizon. Below them stretch great plazas, crowded residential districts, stone roads extending deep into the forest. Today, we often imagine tropical rainforests as untouched wilderness. Yet for centuries, these landscapes were home to extraordinarily complex societies. Maya cities were not merely clusters of temples hidden in the jungle. They were complete urban systems, with water management, trade networks, social hierarchies, astronomy, art, mathematics, and above all, a profoundly developed worldview. The Maya observed the heavens with remarkable patience. They recorded the cycles of Venus, tracked eclipses, constructed sophisticated calendar systems, not out of simple curiosity, but because they believed that the cosmos and human life were intimately connected. Every movement of the sky carried meaning. Every cycle of time reflected a sacred order. Viewed through Jung's lens, we can recognize something deeply familiar. Human beings in every civilization seek a connection between the outer world and the inner world, between nature and the soul, between the cosmos and everyday life. The Maya cities were physical expressions of that search. They were not built solely from stone. They were built from belief, from imagination, from the desire to understand humanity's place within the vast universe. And perhaps that is why, even today, after centuries beneath the embrace of the jungle, these cities continue to move us. Because deep within the collective unconscious Jung described, we recognize something familiar. The longing to look up at the night sky, the longing to understand the stars, the longing to connect our finite lives with something infinitely greater. In the next chapter, we will journey deeper into the worlds of Tikal, Calakmul, Chichen Itza, and Palenque. We will explore how these cities, hidden within the forests, became centers of power, religion, and astronomy, and how gods, kings, and the endless cycles of the heavens together shaped one of the most magnificent civilizations in human history, the great cities of Africa. After leaving behind the pyramids hidden within the forests of the Maya world, where cities were built like maps reflecting the night sky, our journey crosses oceans and deserts once more. Tonight, we arrive in a land often overlooked in many popular accounts of history. A land that for centuries has been viewed more through assumptions than through reality. A land that nurtured wealthy kingdoms, international trade centers, bustling cities, and brilliant civilizations. Ancient Africa. When people think of world history, they often immediately think of Egypt, Greece, Rome, or China. Yet history itself sometimes contains gaps. Some stories are told again and again, others gradually fade into silence. Carl Jung once wrote, "The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong." Perhaps history is much the same. It swings between what is remembered and what is forgotten. And sometimes, what has been forgotten contains the deepest lessons of all. Ancient Africa is one such example. For upon closer examination, we find vast trade networks stretching thousands of miles, centers of power connecting the Sahara Desert with the Mediterranean, connecting the Horn of Africa with the Indian Ocean, connecting gold, ivory, spices, silk, and knowledge across multiple worlds. Tonight, imagine yourself standing in a vast desert. The sun has just set. The air grows cooler. In the distance, a caravan of camels moves toward the horizon. Small bells hanging from their necks ring softly in the wind. Each animal carries goods, news, stories from distant lands. It was caravans like these that created the great cities of Africa, not through war, but through connection, not through conquest, but through exchange. One of the most remarkable centers of power was Aksum, located in what is now the Ethiopian highlands. Aksum was once among the most powerful empires of the ancient world. What is surprising is that for centuries, Aksum was often overlooked in many general histories. Yet at its height, the city controlled trade routes connecting the Mediterranean with the Indian Ocean. Merchants from Rome, Persia, India, and the Arabian Peninsula all knew of Aksum. This was not a city on the edge of the world. It was once one of the world's centers. What made Aksum extraordinary was its ability to connect. It served as a bridge between civilizations, between Africa and Asia, between land and sea, between commerce and faith. The massive stone stelae of Aksum still stand today, silent, majestic, like guardians of memory. Each stone monument reminds us that power does not exist only in places we know well. It can flourish wherever human beings learn how to connect with one another. But if Aksum was the city of sea routes, Meroe was the city of rivers. Situated along the Nile south of Egypt, Meroe was once the center of the kingdom of Kush. For centuries, it was a genuine great power, with armies, trade, art, architecture, and even its own writing system. What is fascinating is that Meroe often lives in the shadow of Egypt within modern perceptions. Yet history is far more complex than that. There were periods when Kushite kings ruled Egypt itself. There were times when cultural influence flowed in both directions. This reminds us of an important lesson. History is not the story of fixed centers. It is a network of interactions, mutual influences, encounters. Jung believed that human identity is not created through isolation, but through dialogue between different parts of the soul. Perhaps civilizations function in the same way. They thrive when they learn from one another, when they embrace the new without losing themselves. Continuing southward, we encounter one of the greatest mysteries in African history, Great Zimbabwe. Even the name carries an air of mystery. Today, its massive stone walls still stand across the landscape, built without mortar, built without cement, simply through the astonishingly precise arrangement of stone. For centuries, many Europeans refused to believe that such a structure could have been built by indigenous African peoples. They searched for alternative explanations, strange theories, far-fetched stories. For sometimes prejudice makes truth difficult to accept. Yet modern archaeology has demonstrated the opposite. Great Zimbabwe was the achievement of the very communities that lived there, a product of skill, experience, social organization, and local ingenuity. That realization makes the site even more remarkable, not merely because of its walls, but because of the lesson it leaves behind. That human history is far larger than any preconceived narrative. That centers of power can emerge in places we least expect. As the night deepens, we begin to realize something important. The cities of ancient Africa were not exceptions. They were not outside world history. They were an essential part of world history. They connected continents, connected cultures, connected people who would never meet face to face. And in the next chapter, we will continue our journey to Leptis Magna, Volubilis, and the trade networks that stretched from the Mediterranean deep into the African interior. Places that reveal that the history of the ancient world was never centered around only a few familiar civilizations. It is the story of countless cities, countless lives, and countless invisible bridges that connected them across time. The ancient cities of the Americas, after leaving behind the vast plains of Africa, where caravans once carried gold, ivory, and stories across the Sahara Desert, our journey tonight continues across the Atlantic Ocean, beyond horizons unknown to the ancient Europeans, beyond maps that once contained great blank spaces marked with the words Terra Incognita, unknown lands. On the far side of that ocean, for thousands of years, other civilizations were quietly flourishing. They were not influenced by Rome. They received no guidance from Babylon. They did not learn directly from Egypt or Greece. They grew in their own way, created their own cities, their own gods, their own systems of knowledge. And perhaps the most remarkable thing of all is that they accomplished this in relative isolation from the rest of the world. Tonight, we step into the ancient cities of the Americas, the cities of Caral, Chan Chan, Cusco, Tiwanaku, places that prove something profoundly beautiful. That human intelligence does not belong to any single civilization. It is a shared capacity of humanity itself. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." It is a statement about the individual, yet sometimes it can also be applied to civilizations. For every culture undergoes a journey of self-discovery. Every people develops its own way of understanding the world, and the ancient cities of the Americas stand as evidence of that journey. If we are to begin somewhere, perhaps we should begin with Caral. Today, Caral lies along the coast of Peru. At first glance, its surviving ruins appear modest compared to some of the world's more famous ancient cities. There are no colossal statues, no gold-covered pyramids, no massive city gates, but we should not let that quiet appearance deceive us. For Caral is one of the oldest cities ever built in the Americas, so ancient that while the pyramids of Egypt were still being constructed, Caral already existed. That thought alone invites us to pause, because history often encourages us to believe that all centers of civilization originated in only a few familiar places. Yet Carroll reminds us that human history is far larger than that. Here, ceremonial plazas, public buildings, residential districts, and shared communal spaces appeared at a remarkably early date. What is especially fascinating is that archaeologists have found little evidence of large-scale warfare, few fortifications, few massive defensive structures. This has led many scholars to ask an intriguing question. How can a society remain stable for such a long period without relying primarily upon military power? Perhaps the answer lies in another form of power, the power of belief, the power of ritual, the power of cooperation. Jung was deeply interested in collective rituals. He observed that symbols and ceremonies help human beings feel connected to something larger than themselves. Perhaps in Carroll, that sense of community became the force that held society together. Yet history never stands still. Time continues to flow. New civilizations emerge. Larger cities are built. And in northern Peru, another great urban center began to rise from the coastal desert, Chan Chan. Even today, Chan Chan remains one of the largest earthen cities ever constructed. Viewed from above, it resembles an enormous labyrinth. Long walls of adobe, vast courtyards, interconnected compounds. A city built not from stone, but from earth. At first, that may sound fragile, yet the reality is extraordinarily impressive. The Chimu people transformed one of the simplest materials available into one of South America's greatest urban centers. There is something profoundly human in that story. For sometimes the greatest achievements are not built from perfect resources, but from the ability to make use of what is available, from imagination, from patience, from the capacity to see potential where others see only limitations. And perhaps that is one of history's deepest lessons. Not every civilization is born upon the most fertile land. Not every city possesses endless resources. Yet many flourish through adaptability, through creativity, through the belief that the future can be shaped by human hands. As night continues to settle over these ancient landscapes, we begin to notice something fascinating. Whether in Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, or the Americas, human beings seem to follow similar journeys. They build communities, they create symbols, they search for meaning, they observe the heavens, they tell stories about their origins, and they strive to leave behind something that will outlast their brief lives. Perhaps this is what Jung meant by the collective unconscious, the deep patterns that appear again and again across civilizations, not because those civilizations were in contact with one another, but because they were all human. In the next chapter, we will continue our journey to Cusco, the heart of the Inca Empire, to Tiwanaku, one of the great mysteries of the Andes. We will explore how these cities were built thousands of meters above sea level, how they mastered the mountains, governed empires, and created architectural wonders that continue to astonish the modern world. A story of civilizations that developed independently across the ocean, yet still reflected the familiar hopes and dreams shared by all humanity. Why do cities collapse? After walking together through the avenues of Babylon, the plazas of Athens, the pyramids hidden within the forests of Teotihuacan, the bustling harbors of Tyre, and the mountain cities of the Inca, perhaps a question begins to arise naturally in our minds. Where are those places now? The voices that once echoed through their marketplaces, the footsteps that once crossed their plazas, the kings who ruled, the merchants who prospered, the ordinary people who loved, worked, hoped, and dreamed. Where did they all go? It may be one of the saddest and yet most beautiful questions in history. For the more we study ancient cities, the more we discover a simple truth. No city lasts forever. No empire is immortal. No wall is strong enough to withstand the passage of time. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that has a beginning has an ending." Although this statement is often interpreted in various ways within discussions of Jungian psychology, its central idea resonates deeply with history. Everything that is born carries within it the seed of change. And cities are no exception. When we look upon ancient ruins today, we often imagine that great cities collapsed because of a single catastrophe, a battle, an invasion, an earthquake, a great flood. Yet history is usually far more subtle. Most cities do not die in a single day. They age, they change, they weaken, and eventually they fade from the center of the world, like a person, like a memory, like a dream. One of the most common causes comes from something that appears deceptively simple: water. Throughout our journey, you may have noticed a recurring pattern. Great cities are often built near rivers, near lakes, near sources of water. Uruk, beside the Euphrates. Memphis beside the Nile. Mohenjo-Daro within the Indus Basin. Rome beside the Tiber. Water brings life, trade, agriculture, and the ability to support tens of thousands of people. Yet rivers are not fixed roads. They change, they shift, they dry up, they alter their course, and sometimes the fate of an entire city changes with them. Imagine that you are a resident of an ancient city. For generations, your family has depended upon the river beside it. You assume it will always remain there, but year after year passes. The water level falls slightly. Droughts become longer. Fields lose some of their fertility. Ships no longer dock as easily. At first, the changes seem small, almost unnoticed. Yet history often works in precisely this way. The greatest transformations usually begin with the smallest changes. Today, archaeologists believe that many ancient cities weakened because of environmental shifts that unfolded over decades or even centuries, not because of one sudden event, but because of countless small changes accumulating over time. That idea always reminds me of something profound within Jung's thought. He believed that transformation often begins with invisible movements beneath the surface. A psychological crisis rarely appears without warning. It is usually prepared long before it becomes visible. A city can be much the same. The walls still stand. The temples remain. Yet the unseen foundations have already begun to change. Another cause appears repeatedly throughout history: the shifting of trade routes. In the ancient world, trade functioned much like the circulatory system of a living body. Goods moved, money moved, information moved, people moved, and cities flourished because of those flows. But what happens when those flows change direction? What happens when new roads appear, when new ports emerge, when new empires take control of commerce? Many cities that were once enormously wealthy suddenly lost their central importance. Not because of war, not because of natural disaster, but because the world simply found another route. In some ways, this resembles our own lives. There are skills that were once essential, jobs that were once indispensable, ideas that once shaped entire eras. Then time passes, the world changes, and what once stood at the center gradually moves to the margins. Not because it has become less valuable, but because the context has changed. The story of ancient cities is that same process unfolding on a grander scale. Yet nature is not always so patient. Sometimes it acts very quickly. An earthquake, a flood, a volcanic eruption, a devastating fire. Within hours or days, what generations spent centuries building can disappear. Pompeii is the most famous example, but it is far from the only one. Across many civilizations, nature has repeatedly reminded humanity of a humbling truth, that no matter how magnificent our creations become, we remain only a small part of the natural world. Perhaps this is why so many ancient civilizations treated nature with profound respect. They understood something that modern people sometimes forget. We do not stand outside nature. We live within it. And in the next chapter, we will continue exploring other reasons why great cities vanished. War, the collapse of empires, migration, and even something that sounds surprisingly simple, yet occurred far more often than we might imagine. People dismantling the stones of an old city to build a new one. For sometimes history does not truly end. It merely changes shape And the lost cities continue to live on in ways we never expected. Everyday life in the ancient city, after witnessing together the rise and fall of great cities, after traveling through empires that once seemed immortal only to disappear beneath the dust of time, perhaps it is time for us to pause somewhere else. Not within the palaces of kings, not atop towering pyramids, not inside magnificent temples, but among ordinary streets, bustling marketplaces, modest homes, roadside stalls, the places where most people actually lived. For there is a fascinating truth about history. Great monuments often attract our attention, yet it is the ordinary things that tell us who a civilization truly was. Carl Jung once wrote, "In all chaos there is a cosmos. In all disorder a secret order." Perhaps nowhere illustrates this more clearly than the cities of the ancient world. At first glance, urban life in antiquity appears almost chaotic. The voices of merchants, the sounds of livestock, the laughter of children, the creaking of carts, the hammering of blacksmiths, the flow of water through underground drains, the prayers rising from temples. Yet beneath all those sounds existed a complex system that allowed tens of thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands of people to live together. And what is especially interesting is that the things helping us understand that life are not always golden statues, not precious treasures, but garbage. It may sound strange, yet waste is one of archaeology's most valuable archives. Because people may write about what they wish to be remembered for, but what they throw away often reveals how they truly lived. Within ancient refuse heaps, archaeologists discover animal bones, fruit peels, broken pottery, worn-out tools, fragments of old cloth, even sandals worn thin by years of walking. These seemingly insignificant objects possess an extraordinary ability to tell stories. They reveal what people ate, what they traded, whether they were wealthy or poor, and the conditions in which they lived. That has always made history feel remarkably similar to psychology. Jung believed that to understand a person, we must look not only at what they consciously present to the world, we must also notice the smaller details, the things they overlook, the things pushed into the deeper layers of the unconscious. Ancient cities are much the same. Sometimes their most honest stories lie within what was discarded. If you were to walk through the streets of Pompeii before the city disappeared beneath volcanic ash, you would encounter a world very different from the one described in many textbooks. You would not immediately meet Roman senators. You would not encounter generals or emperors. Instead, you would meet bakers, winemakers, dyers, porters, cart drivers, ordinary people. The individuals who made up most of the population, but rarely appeared in official chronicles. And interestingly, one of the things that allows them to speak to us across 2,000 years is graffiti. Today, graffiti often brings to mind modern street art, yet people have been writing on walls for a very long time. In Pompeii, archaeologists have uncovered thousands of inscriptions scratched onto walls. Some were advertisements, some were declarations of love, some were political slogans, others were simply jokes. These messages often surprise modern readers because they make ancient people feel familiar. Suddenly they are no longer distant figures in a history book. They become real human beings, capable of love, capable of anger, capable of humor, concerned about money, arguing about politics, not so different from ourselves. Perhaps this is one of archaeology's most beautiful moments, the moment when thousands of years seem to disappear, when we realize that human beings have always been human, no matter the age in which they lived. Yet the true heart of every ancient city was probably the marketplace. If temples were the soul and palaces the mind, then the marketplace was the heartbeat. It was where goods circulated, where news spread, where different languages met, where cultures collided and blended together. Imagine a morning in Alexandria. You might hear Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic, Latin, Hebrew, all spoken at once, like a vast polyphonic symphony. Today, we call this globalization, but its earliest forms existed long ago. Many ancient cities were astonishingly multicultural worlds. People from distant lands met one another and exchanged not only goods, but ideas. And that reminds us that history is not shaped solely by wars. It is also shaped by encounters, conversations, and quiet exchanges between ordinary people. Yet city life was about more than work. It was also about living together. One of the most fascinating symbols of that reality was the public bath. For the Romans, baths were not simply places to wash, they were places to meet, to relax, to exchange news, to build social relationships. A great city required more than roads and drainage systems. It required spaces where people could feel that they belonged. Perhaps that need has existed deep within human nature for a very long time. Jung described it as the need for connection with the collective, a profound part of the soul that constantly seeks belonging to something greater than itself. And the city became one of humanity's ways of fulfilling that need. In the next chapter, we will continue exploring everyday life behind the temples and monuments, from arenas and public entertainment to cemeteries and the ways ancient people confronted death, to nightlife, water management, the existence of slavery, and the social divisions that shaped ancient urban life. For the deeper we wander through these ordinary streets, the more clearly we begin to understand one thing: history was not truly made by kings. History was made by millions of ordinary people, people who lived, loved, worked, and left behind quiet footprints upon the roads of time. The city as a machine of power. As we walk together through crowded marketplaces, steam-filled public baths, and streets where bakers, potters, and merchants once lived, we begin to realize that an ancient city was far more than a collection of houses. It was not merely a place where people lived, not merely a place where they traded, not merely a place where they worked. A city was also a machine, an invisible yet immensely powerful machine. A machine capable of organizing tens of thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands of people into a single community. A machine that created order, created belief, created identity, and above all, created power. Tonight, as torchlight slowly illuminates ancient stone roads, imagine yourself standing within a great city of the ancient world. Perhaps Babylon, perhaps Rome, perhaps Alexandria, or perhaps a capital long erased from the map by time itself. You lift your eyes. Around you stand massive walls, gigantic gates, grand avenues stretching toward the horizon. At first glance, they appear to be nothing more than stone, but in truth, they are ideas transformed into stone. Carl Jung once wrote, "Man cannot stand a meaningless life." Perhaps this was one of the greatest driving forces behind ancient cities. For power does not come only from armies, not only from wealth, not only from laws. The most enduring form of power comes from the ability to persuade people to believe in a shared story, and the city was the grandest stage upon which that story could be told. One of the earliest tools of power was writing. Today, we take writing for granted, yet for most of human history, people lived without it. Memory was passed from person to person. Stories were retold. Laws were remembered. But then cities emerged. Populations grew. Transactions became more complex. Empires expanded. Humanity needed something capable of preserving information beyond the memory of any single individual. And writing was born. In Uruk, one of humanity's earliest cities, the first symbols were impressed into clay tablets. At first, they were simple: records of grain, records of livestock, records of taxes, records of goods. But gradually, writing became something even more powerful than weapons, because whoever controls memory controls power. That idea sounds remarkably modern, yet it existed thousands of years ago. A king may die, an army may disappear, but what is written can continue to endure. And when those records survive, the power of those who created them survives as well. Jung was deeply interested in collective memory. He believed that human beings do not live only in the present. We live through stories of the past, through symbols, through myths, through memories passed from one generation to the next. Ancient cities understood this very well. That is why they did not merely build walls. They built memory itself. They carved victories into stone, inscribed laws upon monuments, engraved the names of kings upon temples, etched myths into public buildings. The entire city became a vast memory system, a library built of stone. One of the clearest examples can be found in ceremonial roads. Viewed from above, many ancient cities were designed around remarkable central axes, not by accident, not simply for transportation, but to create experiences, to guide emotions, to tell stories. In Babylon, processions passed through the Ishtar Gate toward the heart of the city. In Egypt, avenues linked temples with the Nile. In Teotihuacan, the Avenue of the Dead stretched like a sacred journey. People walked along these roads, but at the same time, they were walking through a story about power, a story about the gods, a story about the origins of their community. Today, we call this symbolic architecture, but for ancient people, it was simply the way the world worked. Every step carried meaning. Every structure conveyed a message. Every plaza became a stage. And the city itself became a book that every citizen read each day, whether they realized it or not. This brings us to another dimension of power: architectural propaganda. When we hear the word propaganda, we often think of the modern world. Yet ancient cities employed it very early on. Imagine that you are a farmer living hundreds of miles from the capital. One day, you enter the capital for the first time. You see walls taller than anything you have ever known. Enormous statues, vast palaces, crowded plazas. What would you think? Perhaps your first reaction would not be understanding, but awe. And that is precisely what the builders of these cities intended. For awe is often the first step toward obedience. Ancient rulers understood that sometimes a monumental structure could persuade people more effectively than thousands of speeches. A pyramid, a city gate, a palace. These were never merely buildings. They were declarations. Declarations that this power was real, great, enduring, and blessed by the gods. And when thousands of people witnessed those declarations every day, collective belief began to take shape. In the next chapter, we will continue exploring how cities generated power through founding myths, coins, national symbols, conquered cities, and imperial road systems. We will see that many ancient cities ruled not only through armies, they ruled through imagination, through memory, through stories repeated across generations. And perhaps that is the most powerful form of authority humanity has ever created. Discovering the forgotten cities, after journeying together through ceremonial avenues, colossal gates, and monuments built to proclaim the power of kings, perhaps it is time to pause and listen to a different question, a quieter question, a question that seems almost to whisper from beneath the earth itself. Where did those cities go? Babylon was once the center of the world. Nineveh once inspired fear throughout entire empires. Mohenjo-Daro was once a marvel of urban planning. Teotihuacan was once among the largest cities on earth. And yet, one day, the streets grew silent. The markets ceased to gather. The plazas no longer echoed with footsteps. The houses no longer glowed with firelight. And time began doing what it has always done, quietly covering everything with a layer of dust, then another, and another, until an entire city disappeared from human sight. What is remarkable is that most of human history does not reside in books. It lies beneath our feet. Carl Jung once wrote, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good." Whenever I read those words, I often think of archaeology. For perhaps the earth possesses a kind of unconscious of its own, a vast layer of memory, a place where forgotten things are preserved, things that were buried, things that were once immensely important yet vanished from the awareness of the world, and the work of archaeologists, in a way, resembles the work of psychoanalysts. They dig downward, not into the mind, but into the earth. They search for small traces, a fragment of pottery, a coin, a section of an ancient wall, a rusted ring. From those seemingly insignificant pieces, they attempt to reconstruct an entire world, a world that has slept for thousands of years. Imagine standing in the middle of a wide open field. A gentle wind moves through the grass. Low hills rise in the distance. Everything appears perfectly ordinary. Nothing seems remarkable. Yet beneath that soil there may be a city once filled with tens of thousands of people, with roads, markets, temples, dreams, lives. Everything is still there. We simply cannot see it. There is something deeply Jungian about this image, for Jung believed that much of what shapes a human being does not exist upon the surface of consciousness. It lies deeper, hidden, quiet. Forgotten cities are much the same. They still exist, only in another form, within the memory of the earth, within layers of sediment, within traces that time has not entirely erased. For centuries, discovering lost cities depended largely upon chance, a farmer digging a field, a shepherd finding a strange wall, an expedition noticing stones protruding from the sand. But today, everything has changed. We live in a remarkable age, an age in which human beings can discover buried cities from space. Satellites orbit the Earth, quietly observing, quietly recording, quietly detecting things invisible to the human eye. A subtle change in soil color, an unusual pattern in vegetation, a nearly invisible straight line crossing a field. Sometimes that is all it takes. The trace of an ancient road, a forgotten wall, a lost city. It sounds like science fiction, yet it is reality. Technologies such as satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and LiDAR scanning are transforming the way we understand the past. In dense tropical forests, where vegetation hides everything, LiDAR can seemingly see through the canopy, and suddenly, cities appear. Roads emerge. Plazas reveal themselves. Pyramids, swallowed by the jungle for centuries, begin to take shape once more. That has always moved me deeply, because every archaeological discovery feels like a reunion between present and past, between the living and the dead, between memory and forgetting. Yet perhaps the most astonishing discoveries are not hidden in deserts or jungles. They lie beneath modern cities themselves. Many people do not realize that today's cities are often built directly atop older ones. Rome is a perfect example. Beneath modern Rome lies medieval Rome. Beneath medieval Rome lies ancient Rome. And beneath ancient Rome are even older layers of settlement, like a great layered cake created by history, each generation building upon the foundations of the one before it, each era leaving behind its own traces, each layer of earth becoming another chapter in a story. The same is true in Jerusalem, in Athens, in Istanbul, in Damascus, and in countless other cities around the world. As you walk along a modern street, there may be another street beneath your feet, and beneath that street, yet another. Worlds layered upon worlds, lives layered upon lives, dreams layered upon dreams. Perhaps this is one of history's most beautiful images, because it reminds us that the past never truly disappears. It simply becomes the foundation of the present. Jung believed that human beings cannot fully understand themselves without understanding their past. Civilizations are no different. Modern cities did not emerge from nothingness. They grew from thousands of years of accumulated memory, from dead cities, lost empires, and forgotten people whose names no longer survive. Perhaps that is what makes archaeology so special. It does not merely search for objects. It searches for stories. Stories that time has tried to conceal. In the next chapter, we will enter the final stage of our journey, a chapter devoted to the legacy of ancient cities. to the ways in which Uruk, Babylon, Rome, Mohenjo-Daro, Teotihuacan, and hundreds of other urban centers continue to live among us today. For although their walls may crumble, their plazas may vanish, their palaces may return to dust, the ideas they created continue to endure, quietly, patiently, like sleeping worlds beneath our feet, waiting to be remembered. The legacy of ancient cities. And so, after a long journey across thousands of years of history, after walking together along the baked clay streets of Uruk, gazing upon the legendary gardens of Babylon, passing through the avenues of Alexandria, listening to echoes from the plazas of Athens, pausing beside the gates of Rome, exploring mysterious cities buried beneath forests, deserts, and layers of earth, we finally arrive at the most important question, perhaps also the most beautiful one. What remains? What truly survives after the walls have fallen? After the palaces have become dust? After the names of kings are forgotten? After empires that once ruled the world are reduced to a few lines in history books? What is the true legacy of ancient cities? At first glance, the answer may seem simple. People often think of ruins, columns of stone, statues, temples, artifacts displayed in museums. But if we look a little deeper, we discover that the greatest legacy of ancient cities is not stone, not brick, not bronze or gold. Their greatest legacy is ideas, ways of thinking, ways of organizing society that continue to live with us today. Carl Jung once wrote, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." Perhaps this is the best way to view the ancient city, for the most valuable thing it leaves behind is not the size of its monuments, but the meaning of what it created. When our ancestors lived in small groups, scattered villages, communities of only a few dozen or a few hundred people, the concept of society was very different. People knew one another personally. Every relationship was direct. Then cities appeared. For the first time in history, thousands of strangers began living together. Then tens of thousands. Then hundreds of thousands. This created an unprecedented challenge. How could people who did not know one another cooperate? How could order be maintained? Resources distributed? Conflicts resolved? How could thousands of individuals feel they belonged to the same community? And in attempting to answer those questions, ancient cities created one of the most important inventions in history, the concept of citizenship. Today we take it for granted, but it was a revolution in human thought. For the first time, people began defining themselves not only through family or tribe, but through belonging to a city, a larger community, a shared identity. An Athenian, a Roman, a Babylonian, a Carthaginian. These were not merely descriptions of where someone lived, they became part of who a person was. And from that foundation, the modern idea of citizenship gradually emerged, an idea that continues to shape nations today. Yet cities did not only create citizens, they also created government. For most of human history, before urbanization, managing society was relatively simple. But as populations grew, complexity grew with them. Laws became necessary, records became necessary, tax systems became necessary, administrative institutions became necessary, specialized officials became necessary. Uruk, Memphis, Babylon, Rome, all contributed to the development of the earliest forms of governance. Of course, they were far from perfect, sometimes unjust, sometimes harsh. Yet they laid the foundations for what would eventually become the modern state. That realization never fails to amaze me, because many things we consider modern have much deeper roots than we imagine. Some ideas have been tested for thousands of years. Some lessons have been learned and relearned across countless generations. Yet perhaps the most visible influence of ancient cities can be found in the way they shaped physical space. Today, when we walk along broad avenues, when we cross public squares, when we visit markets, when we enter city halls, when we use water systems, we are living inside ideas that were first developed in antiquity. Urban planning remains one of the greatest legacies ancient cities left behind, from Mohenjo-Daro and its astonishing drainage systems, from Rome and its roads stretching across an empire, from Alexandria and its grid-like design, from Teotihuacan and its monumental ceremonial axes. Every city contributed something to the way humanity organizes living space today. Yet, perhaps the deepest legacy does not reside in streets, but in the mind itself. Jung devoted much of his life to studying what he called the collective unconscious. He believed that human beings do not exist as completely separate individuals. We are connected through shared symbols, shared stories, shared memories. Ancient cities were among the first places where such collective memories were created on a massive scale. Founding myths, festivals, symbols, public monuments, stories of origin, all of them created a sense of belonging. All of them created what we now call community. And perhaps that is the deepest legacy of all. For human beings need more than food, more than shelter. We need meaning. We need the feeling that we belong to something greater than ourselves. Ancient cities helped create that feeling, for the first time in history, on a scale never seen before. When we look at ruins today, we sometimes forget this. We see stone, yet forget that those places were once filled with laughter, conversation, debates, dreams, fears, hopes. Children once ran along those streets. Lovers once met beneath those walls. Elders once shared stories beside the fire. Ordinary people once struggled to build a better life for the generations that would follow. And in a way, they succeeded, because the world we inhabit today still carries their traces everywhere. In our laws, in our governments, in our public squares, in our cities, in our collective memory, and even in the way we think about ourselves. Ancient cities are not merely remnants of the past. They are the places where humanity first learned to live together on a large scale, learned to cooperate with strangers, learned to build civilization, learned to record history, learned to organize power, learned to create shared identity. That is their greatest legacy. And perhaps, when we gaze upon the surviving stones of antiquity today, we are not simply looking into the past. We are looking at the origins of the modern world itself, the origins of the cities in which we live, and, at a deeper level, the origins of ourselves. And so, our journey tonight slowly approaches its final steps. From the first streets of Uruk, where humanity first experimented with living together in spaces larger than tribe and family, to the mighty walls of Babylon, the libraries of Alexandria, the plazas of Athens, the stone roads of Rome, the mysterious cities of the Indus civilization, the pyramids hidden within the forests of the Maya, and the cities buried beneath sand, earth, and memory. Together, we have traveled through thousands of years of human history, yet perhaps the most fascinating discovery is that the farther we journey into the past, the more clearly we understand the present. For ancient cities are not merely places upon historical maps. They are mirrors. Mirrors reflecting the ways human beings think, cooperate, struggle, create, and dream. Carl Jung believed that the history of humanity resembles the history of a soul. Beneath visible events lie deeper patterns, deeper longings, symbols repeated across generations. When we look at ancient cities, we do not merely see walls. We see the need to belong, the need to create order amid chaos, the need to leave something behind for the future, the need to build something greater than ourselves. Perhaps that is why, even after thousands of years, these cities continue to fascinate us, because somewhere within those ancient bricks, we still recognize ourselves. The citizens of Uruk worried about harvests. The merchants of Carthage hoped for successful voyages. The scholars of Alexandria devoted their lives to knowledge. The children of Pompeii played in narrow streets. The mothers of Rome sang their children to sleep beneath the glow of oil lamps. The builders of Mohenjo-Daro labored beneath the sun to complete their works. And although their world was very different from ours, they still loved, still hoped, still feared, still searched for meaning, just as we do today. Perhaps that is history's most beautiful lesson. History does not merely show us how different people once were. It reminds us that human beings have always been more alike than we imagine. Great cities arose and disappeared. Empires that once ruled the world eventually became chapters in books. Palaces that once inspired awe became ruins. Yet the ideas born within them continue to live. Citizenship, community, law, urban planning, trade, education, government, collective memory, all remain present around us every day. In a way, ancient cities never truly vanished. They still live on. In modern cities, in the streets we walk, in the plazas where people gather, in public buildings, in books, and in the very way we organize our lives. Perhaps that is what makes history so beautiful. Time may destroy stone, bring down walls, erase the names of kings, but time rarely destroys ideas completely, and humanity's greatest ideas often survive long after their creators are gone. As the night grows quieter, as our story gently comes to an end, perhaps take a moment to imagine, beneath the modern roads, beneath the buildings in which we live, beneath the lights of the 21st century, there still rest deep layers of memory, sleeping worlds, lost cities, people who lived full lives and left behind an invisible yet immense inheritance, the legacy of living together, the legacy of civilization, the legacy of imagination, the legacy of memory, and above all, the legacy of being human. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey through the ancient cities of the world. If you enjoy these explorations of history, psychology, ancient symbols, and stories designed to gently relax the mind before sleep, be sure to subscribe so you do not miss future journeys. Each week, we will step together into lost worlds, explore ancient civilizations, uncover the mysteries of the human mind, and listen to the stories that time continues to quietly tell. And now, allow your eyes to slowly grow heavy. Let the roads of Babylon fade into the darkness. Let the lamps of Alexandria grow dim beside the harbor. Let the ancient plazas sink into silence. And let history gently guide you into sleep. May your night be peaceful. May your dreams be beautiful. And until our next journey, good night.